You are members of staff, so we've already met. My name is Simatele, and I'm a professor of economics, development economics to be precise. I don't know, I'm hearing a lot of noise. Is it just me? Okay. So, all right, is it not possible to close the doors? I know it's hot, but we can open from the other side. It's quite noisy. The students here, the windows are open. Do you think you can ask them to move? Sorry, people online, just give us one minute, please. These ones here, yeah. These ones, yeah. Okay, thanks. I think that's okay. That's okay now. It's quietened down. Okay, so I was just introducing myself, and I'm going to talk about the postgraduate journey. The postgraduate journey is both a discussion of my own experience through my postgraduate studies, as well as being a supervisor, as well as being somebody that has been involved in the administration of research and postgraduate study for the last 6 years at my institution. So although this is going to be a short presentation, I have only 1 hour and 15 minutes. And if you heard me talk yesterday, you know I can talk, right? So I've really tried today to stay within the 1 hour, 15 minutes that I've been given. I'll do my very best. So what I have done then in preparing these slides is that I've tried to stick to what I've called a primer. So your introduction to research, what is research, and you know, when you start writing, what will you go through? Some of those are procedural, and I think it was a good thing that we started with the director actually talking about the procedures here at Mulungushi, because that's really important. So I've tried to be as generic as possible, and as you can imagine, my presentation is influenced my own journey as well as where I work. But the director's presentation was extremely important in setting that context and the relevance to you. So as I've tried to be as generic as possible and as brief as possible, but at the same time, he also talked about the things that we can do together, right? He talked about co-supervisions and things like that. Other things that we did talk about yesterday with the supervisors and the members of staff is that we will also make resources available for you, right? So a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about, for example, this is definitely not a methodology discussion. I'm not going to go into details. I'm going to mention the things methodology, but this is not a methodology module, so I'm not going to go into detail in terms of what goes into your methodology. How do you sample? How do you, pick all those things? But we're quite willing to share resources if the director system that can help you to dig deeper into that. And Prof already mentioned we do run workshops online occasionally, and you're free to join us maybe to dig deeper into some of the things that I'm going to talk about this morning. So what is it that we want to get out of the next 1 hour that we're together? As I said, it's going to be a primer, right? And my idea is to talk about what does academic research at the postgraduate level involve. I'm going to look at the various steps that are required in the process of postgraduate study. Particularly, I have devoted a significant amount of time to talking about the proposal. The reason being that if you've passed your proposal, you probably know what is ahead of you. So I'm starting from there and spending a whole lot of time there, and then I give a few pointers. In addition, when it comes to the actual PhD journey in terms of what do you write, where, what's the sequence of the chapters, and so on and so forth, those are one institutional. So I've tried again very generic in that area. And I'm glad that I've got support from Prof. Willie and from Dr. Hare here from the directorate that will sort of chip in terms of processes where they're necessary. Okay, so I've sort of looked at what's a rough idea of things that go into your proposal. You know, once you've written your proposal, what steps would you need to actually conduct your research, and what are some of the few good practice things that you need to take into account when you are doing your postgraduate study, whether it's your master's or your PhD. After that, I'm hoping that I will leave enough room for you to ask questions. Another part that I would like to talk about very briefly, however, I think is really important, is how do you interact? We had a whole, I think, 2 sessions as academics yesterday and the day before, looking at how to interact with your students. But how do you, as a student, interact with your supervisor? I've just put a slide or 2 because I think that's quite important as well. So before I proceed, I'll just like to see by a show of hands, including the people online. Prof, you can check for me. Please, through a show of hands, can I see those who are already deep into their research, who've already passed their proposals? Okay, I can see 1 hand there. How many? Okay, no one in the room. Okay. Online, I saw 1 hand. How many hands do we have going up, Prof? Okay. Okay, so really the majority of you are at the start of your Oh, sorry. How did I get muted? So I'm not sure where I left them, but okay, continue from here. Okay, so I was just asking the question, what is research? And after a census of the people in the room, I am saying academic research is the collection of information or data. Some people might say information and data, depending on your perspective, and then analyzing that information, using it to make sense so that you can answer a research question or address a problem in the community, a real life problem. Okay, I want to go back to the discussion we just had on decolonization. And I really like your example about family planning in Zambia. One of the things that I see, especially for students, and maybe we have encouraged it in the fact that we have not decolonized the way that we teach, is that students write on questions that, or research on topics that have been done until they were dead, like they're dead. They've just been over-researched without any context, right? Now, here's the thing. When our colonial masters were here, the things they were teaching us were current at that time. Then they went back and they continued to be current, but we're stuck in 1964. So in picking your topic, you really need to get that context right. Really important. When I think about analyzing information, when I think about research, how relevant is that topic that I'm looking at? I'm going to get into that in a bit, but I think it's really important to remember that when you pick a topic, the purpose of academic research is not research for its own sake, right? We often distinguish between applied research and yeah, even academic research must be a solution to something, right? Purely academic research is developing theories. One of the things that Prof kept saying is, where are the African theories? Where are the African theories? And I was sharing yesterday with the staff that one of the things that's driving my research is this thing that about informality. Why do we have this attitude about people who sit and sell fruits, vegetables, food on the roadside? Somebody wrote a book, I think it's De Santos, where he was saying that we can change our mindset, the way that we look at small businesses and see them as, and he was speaking purely from a business perspective. He was saying multinational companies can make millions at the bottom of the pyramid. Do you realize that if you went to ShopRite, and I'm going to try and remember the prices now, very expensive stuff, by the way. If you went to ShopRite and spent 90 rands to buy a 2-liter container of cooking oil, ShopRite just made 90 rands, right? You take that 90 rands and then you go to a township. I don't know the names of the townships in Kawe, but you go to a township in Kawe. Huh? Makururu, okay. You go to Makururu and you get the plastic net. Do they still do plastics? They still do that. You get a small plastic and you pull, you tie, you pull. At the end of the day, that 90 kwacha becomes 200 kwacha. Small, you tie small. That was his argument, that the reason that people at the bottom of the pyramid don't consume these things is that they are packaged in sizes that they cannot afford. Makes sense? Well, when you really think about it, that's true. But nobody's really reflecting about this from a business perspective. Now, of course, my concern is poverty. And my argument is that it helps to address poverty because those people can never really be able to afford a 2-liter, container of cooking oil. So there are certain things that we can try and bring down and contextualize when we are thinking about the research that we're going to do. Really, the thing that I think we're drumming this morning, your research must be context relevant. That is really important because when you collect that information, when you analyze that information, when you are making sense of that information, it must be addressing something. You either have a solution in Mukulu, you want to solve that problem, or you're trying to develop a theory to help people understand the phenomena from an African perspective. You need to be groundbreaking. We celebrate people who get Nobel Prizes and so on. What is the difference? Because they are not afraid to step out and be different and do something different. We quite like when we start writing, we pick a dissertation or a thesis that somebody already wrote. That's the typical attitude that students have. You look at how they wrote it, how they structured it, and then you start writing, you've got it there and you're looking at it. You need to start thinking independently. So that's really important. It's a systematic process of getting that information, using it to address a real life question. The key stages in research is the planning stage. We're going to get into that in a bit. The data collection and the analysis. Those are the key stages. Okay, my computer is up. Okay, there we go. So the research process originates with a problem or a question, and I've already sort of spoken to that. Right? I like the Tonga thing you're doing. I mean, I'm not in that discipline area, so I'm completely blank about what you're doing. But the fact that you're doing something native, right? I also kind of feel a bit sad that you go to a panel and they will tell you that, no, you can't present something without having cited something on Tonga. And that's important if the literature exists, right? But it could also be groundbreaking research where literature does not exist. Don't fear to go into those areas where literature does not exist. So there's a difference, right? There's a difference between an interesting, relevant topic, which has not been researched on, and a topic that has just not been researched on because it has absolutely no relevance to anyone. So there are two things. A topic may not be researched on or written about because it's useless. If we know this, what are we going to do with it? You know? Or it's not interesting to anybody, no policymakers, no academics, no nothing. If you get into that space, your work will never be cited, nobody will ever look at that work. So you need to have that wisdom with the guidance of your supervisor to know that, you know what, this is a dead area, don't even go there. Or to say, you know what, this is an exciting area, there's potential here, and I'm going to venture. I've got, my daughter wants to know about Tongas. So she said, Mommy, can you bring me a book on Tongas and their culture and their traditions? And I'm here scratching my head. Where am I going to get a book like that? Nobody's writing on this. It's extremely important. Maybe because, you know, we know the Tongas are from Southern Province, who cares? They can't speak Nyanja or something, you know, like, we don't care. But there are people who care. There are people who will read that. We need to be able to venture out and learn about our own cultures. How many traditional ceremonies do we have in this country? Who can go into a library and pick a book on any Zambian traditional ceremony and read? There are no books written on these things. My daughter was doing a study on, what is it? The Aborigines of because that's where she can get a book. She wants to learn about Africa. There's no there's Aboriginal law, there's no African law. Nobody's talking about our history, where we came from and all these things. We need to start writing. So that's really important. So when you are picking a topic, you need to pick a question or a problem that is relevant, that is context specific. You can make a contribution from a methodological perspective. So your problem might be saying, the methods that we use to look at these African problems are not relevant to Africa. And I want to look at this problem, which has already been researched, but nobody has used this methodology, which I think is relevant to the African context. So I'm going to look at this problem and demonstrate that if you look at it using this methodology, you will find different answers because this methodology is more relevant to Africa. That's a methodological contribution, okay? You can have a theoretical contribution. A theoretical contribution means that we are looking at a phenomenon. We are observing this phenomenon. We've been trying to explain this phenomenon with existing theories. It's not adding up because the theories don't really explain what we are seeing. Chances are because those theories are Western, right? We want to do something that is Afrocentric. So I'm going to research such and such so that I can develop an African perspective. I don't really have much time to get into examples, but one of the things that 2016, I think it was, I was funded with my colleagues to do a study on livelihood strategies. And we went around, we interviewed, I think, about 2,300 households. And the more we looked at this, the more we listened to them, the more I realized that the capabilities model that we had actually chosen to use did not explain what we were doing. And in our reports to the government, we proposed a model, a framework that we could use to understand the way that the people in the rural areas particularly were thinking. And one of those things that we brought out that was the fact that the South African community in general had an entitlement mentality, and it was affecting the livelihood strategies that they were picking. It was affecting their attitude towards government resources. Now, you being a Zambian, if I come to your house and I say, why don't you have a garden at the back of your house? You'll probably say, ish, I don't have money for seeds. I don't have money to buy, a hoe or something like that. The common 90% of the time in the rural areas, in fact, I shouldn't say the rural areas, the common response we got is the government hasn't done such and such. The government hasn't done such and such. And for some reason, that doesn't sit well when you say it to people. It's like you are saying South Africans are lazy or something. No, you're not. You are saying this is the way people think. Now, you have to be brave, I think, in my view, to be able to say the things you find which are contentious, right? And of course, because this was a very contentious thing we said, our model has been very sluggish in being adopted, but we're pushing the agenda nevertheless. So we make sure whenever we get an opportunity, we use that model because we know that someday somebody will listen, right? So when you are making a contribution, thinking about a question, a research problem, you can actually make a theoretical contribution, which I think, for example, the demographic thing you're talking about, if you now move away from desktop and going to interview the people, you could come up with a framework of understanding. And sometimes it's not just a matter of variables. As quantitative people, we say beta is equal to 0.5. So 1% increase in the number of condoms given is going to have, a 1% impact on family planning. Sometimes the stories, and that's why I've moved into mixed methods, in my research. Sometimes the stories help you to understand the framing, the thinking, so that you can find a way of actually developing theories that are Afrocentric. Okay. So that's the origins of your question and your problems. You need to be able to clearly articulate your goal. Sometimes you can be so excited about what you want to do that in the end, you don't know what you want to do. Oh, I'm so excited about informality. It's this important, it's that important. Where I live, there are so many people who sell. And then I'm going to ask you, so what about informality do you actually want to say? Right? So you have to have a clear goal. I want to understand why people sell their products at the bus stop and not where they live. Then you're very specific, right? I want to understand why 90% of the people who are involved in informality in Zambia are female, right? I want to understand why the taxi industry in the informal sector, we call them minibuses here, by the way, minibuses, that industry is male dominated. Actually, I've never seen a female minibus driver. They're there? They're there. About 2. Okay. So these are interesting questions. You are not just looking at the broad, area that you have to be specific. You have to be able to articulate your goal. Prof talked about the TikTok thing, Prof, where somebody is asked to articulate what they've written in their thesis in maybe, let's say in 30 seconds. I've started doing that with my students. I'm giving you 1 minute to tell me what your research is about. And then you find, Somebody has been writing, they can't articulate it in 1 minute. If you can't say what your objectives are in 1 minute, you're not focused enough. So you need to be able to clearly articulate your goals or your objectives. You must follow a plan of procedure. Research is systematic, right? Why do you think research is systematic? Why do you need to go through specific steps? Some of the things we say about research is that somebody must be able to replicate your study, right? And find the same answers. If I come and I use the exact same data that you use, I must be able to get the same answers. If I follow the same steps and I address the same community as you, I must be able to get the same answers, correct? So the process of scientific research is very important. That's why when you are sampling, you don't just randomly go on the street and ask anybody or who is going to, you have to systematically think about the characteristics of the individuals or if you are a scientist or whatever material you are using, that is going to be part of your sampling process. Because when we think about science, most of the time we think about the natural sciences, right? Social science is scientific as well. You must follow a scientific procedure, which ensures the validity of your work, which ensures the replicability of your work. Those are very important, okay? So really important to follow a specific plan or procedure, okay? And your research must divide the principal problems into more manageable sub-problems. So at the university, let me say in our faculty, right? I'm not sure what the other faculties do, but in our faculty, we have the template. The director talked about your template. In the template that we have, I'll call it a template, we ask our students to write the objective and then sub-objectives. What that does is that it allows you to really think about what you're going to do out there. So for example, I have a student currently who's just presented his proposal. He's looking at why people use both formal and informal finance. I don't know if it's that common here, I haven't looked at the data, but in South Africa, we have up to about 50% of people who can afford to just use banks and other formal forms of finance, still using informal finance. And that's a phenomenon that we can't explain because theoretically, people who use informal finance use it because they're excluded from the institution. But now you find that 50% of them still use informal institutions. So he's looking at understanding the nature of informal finance in sub-Saharan Africa, looking at why people combine the use of informal finance. So, objective, what is the objective? He wants to look at the nature of informal finance and its popularity in sub-Saharan Africa. That's his objective. Now, if you just put that and don't break it down, it could mean 101 things, right? Depending on who's reading it. So for you to be clear enough so that the people who are evaluating you and you, when you get into the field, are clear enough what you're going to do, you must break it down, right? First sub-objective, I want to understand the types of informal financial services that are being used. Second objective, I want to look at the factors that influence the growth in the use of informal finance. Third objective, I want to look at the relationship between informal finance and formal finance. Why? Because you know what? The use of informal finance and its popularity amongst people who are included could actually result from the fact that these two are related, right? So that if I'm using formal finance, I actually need one leg in the informal sector. The literature suggests that the relationship could be complementary, the relationship could be competitive. We don't know, the literature is not clear. So he's investigating that. So that he has broken down what he wants to look at. Somebody else can take that and articulate different sub-objectives. But if you put them together, they come back to that main objective. So it's very important to break down your main objective into doable chunks. So you can start, the first thing I'm going to do is find out what services are being used, right? So that's what the sub-objectives are doing, isn't it? They're helping you take your research piece by piece and saying, okay, I've achieved this objective. What next? How does this next bit relate to the bit I've already done? So that's really important. Okay. And of course, it requires the collection and interpretation of data, which I've already spent a whole lot of time talking about, so I'm not going to go back to that. Okay. So the next thing is what goes into your thesis or dissertation proposal? So I said I'm going to spend a bit more time on this one. So in our context, a thesis is for PhDs and dissertation is for masters. Right. So writing your thesis or dissertation, you have an overview to start with. The title. First thing you must look at is the title. Students pick titles very carelessly. Think about what goes into the title. So I'm going to talk about that in a bit. Think about the context. I think we've really spoken a lot about the context, but what you intend to do. So the purpose, the objectives, you need to look at the statement of the problem and the research questions. You need to articulate why this topic is worth studying. That is a very important part of what you're going to write. What we have in our template, we have a small section called the significance of the study. You have to articulate why this study is important. Some people call it the rationale. It's the same thing. Okay. And you also need to look at how you intend, which is your methodology. And then sometimes some institutions require you to submit a timeline. For us, that's not part of the proposal process. It's something you agree with your supervisor right at the start. And also because we have these checkpoints, which I noticed according to what you presented, there are also checkpoints here. And you know that there are checkpoints. So you use that to sort of pace yourself, but sometimes it's important to submit a timeline. And for us, the timeline becomes important when you're applying for ethics and clearance. You need to stipulate the process of carrying out the study. Because if you actually don't finish collecting your data within the first year of your ethics certificate, you have to go back to the ethics committee and you also need to indicate where you're going to conduct your study. So delivering your study is important. So let me just very briefly then go into each and every one of these sections. The title is very important. Now I'm going to look at some good parameters that you need to consider when picking up the title and some characteristics of the content. However, I want to say that a title is not final per se, at least for us, it's not final. You can negotiate the title afterwards, but the context must remain, and you can't completely change it, by the way, but it can be negotiated. So just to say, but typically a good title will indicate the purpose of the study and the narrative tone of the paper, or sorry, of the thesis or the dissertation. It varies therefore, because the tone is different, it varies therefore from positivist and subjectivist approaches. And one of the biggest issues we have in our higher degrees committee, in our faculty, is this contention between those who are number people and those who are not number people, because people say, but your topic must have this, and yeah, so discipline issues are very important. The methods used can be put in your study if relevant, okay? And the initial aim of the title is to capture the reader's attention. So especially when you start to write papers from your thesis, right? The title must capture. And for you who's doing a master's, I want to assume that you are putting your master's dissertations online. Yes. Okay. So one of the most important things about academic work is the citation. Your work has to be cited. Remember yesterday, Dr. Marongwe mentioned that it's unethical to not share your work, right? One of those evidences of your work being shared is the citation. And the title of your dissertation or thesis will either have you cited or not cited at all. when you're picking the title of your thesis or your dissertation, think about those key technical words in your field. Like right now, and again, this changes over time, so you have to be conscious of the times. Like right now, if I had I was writing a paper and I said financial inclusion, right? If I said SDGs, chances are somebody will pick it up. So it's really important to think about what are the current, buzzwords. What are the current buzzwords? Are they relevant to my work? And include those, because then your work will be cited. You will have to put those as the keywords when you do your abstract, when you enter your work online. And when people are searching for work, they're going to be able to find your work and they'll be able to cite it. I always say it's sad that my most cited work is still my thesis, which I would really like to rewrite now if I had an opportunity. But it's the most cited work that I have. And it's the work that has brought me the most students, that has brought me the most invitations to take part in academic work. So your thesis, your dissertation is extremely okay. So and then of course I think I've already covered some of the characteristics of a good title. Using abbreviations is not allowed, at least in our context. We don't use abbreviations in a title. However, there are certain abbreviations that are allowed. For example, GDP, SDG, you can use those because IMF, they're generally accepted abbreviation. Some people still say no, but if you go into good journals, for example, you will find papers with those abbreviations. It just depends. Some of those things are institutional matters as well. Okay. So like I said, really use current nomenclature from your study, from your field, but also just from general imperatives. One of the things that we talked about when we're talking about research is what are the national imperatives. In Zambia, we have a new government now, and I gave the example the other day. We have a new government. What are their priorities? When you start to write your proposal, point out those priorities and how your work is going to contribute to the understanding of those national priorities. Global priorities. I mean, COP26 is going on. Why not make that, if you're doing something on climate change? So bring the sustainability, bring the climate change. Those are very current things that would catch the attention of the reader to look at your work. That's very important. Identify key variables. And I always say for me, for my students, right? It's really important to have some sort of reference to the key variables. For example, I said this guy that I'm working with. There's a mango near that club there. That's a really important variable. I have to have it in the title. If, for example, yesterday I got a request. So 4 is it? He wants to look at deindustrialization and GDP. Those are the most important variables. One is a dependent variable, one is an independent variable. So you need to consider what are the key variables in your study. And when you start writing your introduction, now I'm moving a little bit ahead of myself. When you start writing your introduction, those variables must feature. You must be creating a relationship. So if you're going to look at GDP and deindustrialization, you must be talking about them in the background. Somebody must understand what is the potential relationship between deindustrialization and GDP. What is the current state of deindustrialization? How does that relate to GDP? So that's really important. Those key variables, if you can put them in your title. One thing that's very common in titles is an analysis or a study of. We discourage that. Every research is a study. And remember when I said the stages of your study, I talked about the fact that analysis is one of those things, right? So every study has an analysis. So there's no point to say an analysis or a study in your title. You really try to discourage having that in your title. Yes.
Okay. Zabuera.
Anybody else wants to reflect on the title? Yes, please. It's always an investigation. So we it's never a time when a research is happening. Yeah. Okay. Oh dear. Okay, it's been muted now. Okay, yeah, please. Yeah.
At times they may, but like those doing PhDs, I think they try as much as possible to make me not use such things. For example, in part, what are stated with was I think it's assumed that not like what you're trying to do is like we named yesterday, we are finding that the interest is to deploy creating knowledge. So using such things is more like writing a paper like Prof. We would say, having found data, I argue what was the impact of that. It sounds better, but for an academic document, those
Thanks. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay, is this in the title you're referring to? Okay, so let me just comment. Okay, so for the people online, she's just asked a question that follows up on what we were doing, trying to help students focus. So for me, things like examine is the same thing as investigate. So it can help a student focus, but that should be taken to the section where you're discussing the objectives and not in the title. So essentially, I mean, examine It's almost like discuss. Those are assessment verbs, right? They should go to the section in the document. And in the title, just go straight to what the paper is about. So I will, if I don't answer that question, please remind me when we start talking about the section on the purpose, because that's where the focus really comes in. Of course, the focus is important in the title as well. And sometimes what I do actually, maybe to sort of respond to you, what I do is that I tell my students, we don't need a title now, or we can have a working title. Just, you know, like this guy, I think we started off with the relationship between informal finance and something. And as we wrote the background, did the statement of the problem, the objectives, it started to get more and more refined. The student got clearer what he wanted to do. And I think it's really important. I think maybe I should have emphasized this at the beginning. I have it at the end, unfortunately, to emphasize that your proposal is an iterative process. You're not writing a document, hopefully. You're not writing one document where you go to your supervisor and say, here is the proposal. It's an iterative process between you and your supervisor, which helps to, you know, refine it. When I work with my students, okay, so now I'm just going to talk, and when I get to those sections that I've covered, and I'll skip over so I can try and address your question. So what I do with my students is the first thing I do is write me a synopsis. You want to work on this topic, write me a synopsis. The first thing is, what is it you want to study? Right? So give me the purpose, the objective. Why? Significance. And I want that in one page, no more than that. Why are you looking at this? Who's going to benefit from this? What are we going to learn from it? How do you intend to carry out the study? Who's going to be your population, or where is your data going to come from? Economists like secondary data. Where is your data going to come from? Who do you think will make use of this information? I want all that in one, no more than one page. You give that to me. Normally we would have 2-3 iterations on that synopsis before we get to a point where we are happy that this is where we want to take this. Once we agree, I then start now section by section. Write the background. The background must be aligned with the synopsis that we agreed on, right? And in your background, you want to give the reader an idea of the context first. If it is a study based in Kabwe, so let's say we're looking at poverty, is it Makululu? We're looking at poverty in Makululu. Poverty is a very general topic, right? There's poverty. What about poverty? We want to look at the factors that lead to a chronic cycle of poverty. I don't know whether it's here or yesterday, but I think if you look at we call them compounds in Zambia, right? If you look at compounds in Zambia, there's chronic poverty. People just never get out of the cycle. We were, I was telling them the story, I'm sure you all know the story because it's a Zambian story, of the little boy who was interviewed, and he said, you know that story? Right? The father's job is to steal phones, handbags, or whatever, right? Now, what do you think that child will do when that child grows up? He's going to do the exact same thing, right? Because as far as he's concerned, his father wakes up and goes to work. And the job that his father does is to steal, right? And his children after him, and their children after them. And then they get trapped in this cycle of poverty. So we want to go in Makululu now and find out, why are people trapped in this cycle of poverty? We want to write the background now. What are we going to include? What's going to go in the background? Come on, people. Are there any social scientists? Because this is not an economics problem, this is a social science problem. Actually, no, even the natural scientists can do something about that. What will you put in your background? People online, you can type in the chat and Prof can let us know what your comments are. Please do type your observation. What would you include? Okay, they can, yeah, let them ask. They can ask, Prof. They can ask. What goes into the background, people? Come on now. For everyone, students first. Students first. Okay, guys, you are going to start working on your research, right? Independence of thinking now. I am not proceeding until you tell me what you think in that background. Sorry, I'll go back. What you going there? We're looking at it. So what about the area of what about the houses? What about the children? What about the poverty situation in that area, right? So the reader wants to understand, you're telling us this poverty. You know, this is one of the one of the problems that we see with students is they'll say there's a lot of poverty in Mulungushi. Then they don't give us numbers. How do we know? Why should we trust you that there's poverty in Mulungushi? Remember, the people who will be reading your work have never been to Mulungushi, right? So if you say there's poverty in Mulungushi, you must give us numbers, right? And not just there's 80% poverty rate in Mulungushi. You are saying this is an impoverished area. So you must be comparing Mulungushi to a more affluent area, isn't it? There's this poverty in there, and you can say maybe only 10% of the people that live in Mulungushi ever move up the social mobility ladder, ever get out of poverty. So the background must talk about the poverty. It must tell us that people are not moving out. Because the issue is, you are saying that there is chronic poverty, people are staying in. You must prove that people are staying in. Tell us what's going on in there. So the context is extremely important when you're giving your background. You must give the state, the status, what does it look like? And in some disciplines like geography, you could even put pictures and show. In economics, you can give us a graph. You know, graphics are very good at conveying information. So where you can, give that background, provide the data and information, and please focus on the variable of interest. This study that we've decided to choose is not on poverty. Is it on poverty? It's on chronic poverty, right? So you need to be careful that there are these big words that could, there's these broad words that could cover like a whole lot of things, and poverty is one of those. So you must, if we're picking this study that we're talking about chronic poverty. You must keep it, focused. So we're talking about focus. Okay, the person who was asking about focus is not here. Okay, so we're talking about focus, keeping it focused. The background must remain focused. Remember, we said you have those variables. So as economists, we normally have these dependent and dependent variable things. The relationship, the potential relationship between those variables must come out in that introduction or in the background. And the next thing that we present in our template is the statement of the problem, right? Now, so many times, Prof, I would say maybe 60, 70% of the time in our higher degrees, when a student has finished presenting, the question is, but what is the problem, isn't it? That's where students get stuck. What is the problem? What are you researching? What's the issue? In this case, where the example we gave of Mulungushi, the issue is not poverty, eh? Let's remember that. What is the issue? What is the issue in this example we gave? Chronic poverty. So you must, in the statement of the problem, you must state what the problem is. Give the reader an understanding of the problem. And one thing that I emphasize to my students, don't just tell me about the problem. What is your study doing to address this problem. Because now you're telling us why it's worth listening to you, right? There's chronic poverty in Makululu. We don't understand. The fact that there's chronic poverty in Makululu doesn't mean it's worth researching. Maybe somebody has already researched it. Maybe the government is already doing something about it, right? So you tell us about chronic poverty, and then you indicate that despite this, there are no policies that address education or whatever it is you want that could help people move out of that situation. You can talk about the fact that the schools in Makululu are very poor. They have very few members of staff and so on, few teachers, you know, and there are other factors that contribute. The housing is poor, the sanitation is poor, and that just makes it the whole problem much bigger. And this study that I'm going to do is actually going to unearth the reasons why this is the case and identify, you know, identify potential solutions that can help to move these people out of poverty. The statement of a problem must not just state things as they are. They must somehow link to your study. Because the next stage after that, you're going to talk about the objectives of your study, and then you're going to give us the rationale. So it's very important. And in writing your statement of the problem, the potential, I mean, the gap must be indicated. Remember I said, just because there's a problem doesn't mean it's worth researching. Is the gap policy implementation? Is the gap theoretical understanding of the issues that are there? What is the gap? You need to indicate what the scientific gap is, okay? And you must obviously provide evidence. I've talked about that. And also now you provide more detailed information related to some of the key issues you hinted at in your introduction. Remember, introduction is just that, an introduction, right? Introducing people to something, okay? Please limit the variables you address in your statement of the problem, but you must point to the potential reasons, right? In the statement of the problem, it's important for you to highlight the fact that it could be this, it could be that, it could be that. That's why I'm looking at it. Why is that important? Because now we're moving into the section where you're looking at the aims and objectives. That it could be that, it could be that now becomes an issue when you start to look at the detailed aims and objectives. You must point to them. Yes. Sure. Yeah, please. Literature review methodology. Cool. Thanks. Anybody else? No? Okay. Right, we can proceed. Prof, if there's a question I need to address, you let me know. Okay. So the aims and objectives, your aims and objectives must be sharp and to the point, right? Typically, I tell my students, if you cannot articulate your objective in one sentence, you need to rewrite it. Without too many commas, eh? You know, you can just put commas and keep writing. You need to be concise. What is your objective? My objective is that I want to understand the factors that contribute to chronic poverty in Makululu. Finish, done. Then you break it down. I think I spoke to that quite a bit in the introduction, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. So it's very important. And in some disciplines, you are then required to develop those into research questions, right? So you can say, why is that why is it that the level of social mobility in Makululu is very low, right? And then you develop related questions as you go. You develop related questions. I've already mentioned that will help you to, there's a hand up unless, I think that's a legacy hand. It's been up for a while. Or is it my screen maybe is frozen, eh? It's probably my screen frozen, Prof. Yeah, it's my screen frozen. Okay. All right, so that's important. Show the original contributions of your study, right? Are you going to come up with a framework? Are you making a methodological contribution? Is it policy implications? One of the things that I don't like, and some things you need to do because it's required in your discipline, is that there's this assumption that a study must always contribute to policy. That's a fallacy. You don't have to contribute to policy. No. What if I want to just make a theoretical contribution? I want to come up with a framework for understanding a phenomenon, right? The most important thing is to have a contribution, and your objective must, your sub-objectives, your research questions must articulate some contribution. It doesn't have to be a policy, but there has to be a contribution, okay? And then in the put that significant section, but it's important that there must be some rationale which justifies why we are studying this. And depending on where you put it, I think we have a little section called delimitation of the study right at the end in our template. Some people put it right here in the aims and objectives to indicate what you're not covering. So for example, I'm going to focus only on chronic poverty and not on other issues on poverty. That's very important. So that the person who's saying you have not done this and you have not done that, you can say, those are very important questions, but my study does not focus on those. It's very important. I've talked about justification. I think you need to indicate why the study is important, show how your project contributes to existing research. That can be methodologically, policy-wise, theoretically. In our context, you need literature in this section when you're writing your proposal. You need to justify from a literature perspective that there's a gap or there's a need for this kind of study. You can point to imperatives if you like, you can point to other studies that have indicated that there's a gap here, or you can point to the existence of a problem. But you need some literature that shows that your study is relevant. The how part of your proposal is looking at the methodology. Like I said, this is not a methodology course, so I'm not going to go into detail, but it's important, I think, to look at certain things. For example, the design of your study is very important. Is it an experimental study or a non-experimental study? Typically, experiments happen in the natural sciences and in psychology, I think. Psychologists do a lot of experiments. Economists are venturing. Behavioral economics now does a lot of experimental studies. I'm not sure I've bought fully into them, but I'm sort of almost there. You know why I don't fully buy into them? Human beings, man, we like to, I don't know. When there's a stimulus, we react in a particular way. We always joke with my kids. When we make a call to my husband, the way he answers on the phone, we know whether he's with someone or not. Do you have that? Do you have people like that? Right? We're human beings. If you're putting me in an experiment situation, I'm going to behave the way you expect me to behave, right? So I'm not so sure that experiments really result in objective responses for human beings. I stand to be corrected, especially by people from psychology, but we respond in a particular way to stimulus. If I meet a fellow Zambian, there's a way I'm going to behave. If I'm speaking to a foreigner, there's certain mannerisms I will exhibit or not exhibit, you understand? So anyway, experimental or non-experimental design is very important to think about because typically experimental designs require quantitative methods. Very important. Non-experimental designs, you can use both qualitative and quantitative methods, okay? And so your design feeds into the approach that you are using. So it's very important to be clear right from the start, whether you're using an experimental or non-experimental design. And again, when you get to the approach, it's very important to understand your data you're going to use. What are the units? What is the type of data? Is it qualitative? Is it quantitative? Is it mixed? Now that is really important. And I know I said this is not a methodology course, but it's really important to remember that the methodology should not be picked arbitrarily. It needs to be linked to your research objective. Is the method you are picking actually going to help you answer the questions that you have? If I say why, I want to understand why, and then I pick a quantitative methodology, do you think that's going to work? It won't work, because the why question requires someone to articulate their subjective opinion on something. So you need to be very careful when you're picking a methodology to make sure that it will actually help you to address the question that you're raising. So the types of data are important, your data sources and sampling, whether you're going to use secondary data or you're going to use primary data. There's a section I've indicated, ethics, really important. And I've written it somewhere, I'll skip when I get there, but please never start collecting your data before you get your ethics. I don't know how strict Mulungushi is, but in our case, we were not strict for a while. So students realized that we can go and then come back and say, can I get a condonation, please? I collected data without, and then we lost our ethics certificate as an institution. The National Research Ethics Committee withdrew our certificate. For almost 9 months, we couldn't issue certificates. So we cleaned up our act. So now, you know how it is. Every system has this. I said, don't worry, just go. They'll come and then they came and we said no. So imagine now, you have spent 2 years, you've done your master's, you've written. Now you're at the stage where it needs to be examined. And our committee says, where's the ethics clearance? We will not appoint your examiners until we see your ethics clearance. No, but you see, the ethics clearance took long to come. That's not an excuse. You should factor that into your planning. So please, never start collecting your data until you've got your ethics clearance. Okay, very important. Okay. Delimitations, I think I've already talked about. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So the question for those online is that, could I just quickly articulate what I mean by mixed methods? Mixed methods really is just what it says. It's a mix of qualitative and quantitative methods. But so you use both methods to address your research question. And it can be in 2 ways. One, in fact, this is why I think people should use mixed methods. If one of these 2, using only one, is not enough to address your research question. I think sometimes my students think it's just because Prof likes mixed methods, so it's fashionable, let's just do mixed methods. No, you only use mixed methods if quantitative methods or qualitative methods alone is not sufficient to address your questions. Now, there are various types of mixed methods that you can use. I can't remember the technical terms now, but I'll tell you the different, just how you can use it. One is that you can start with your qualitative, for example, you start with a qualitative study. We talked about the why. Why do people not move up the social ladder in Makulu, right? We go, we ask people questions, and then we're able from that why data, the qualitative data, whether it's interviews or focus groups or whatever we do, we're able to identify some important variables, right? Now, we have been able to say, okay, according to the people we interviewed, these are the variables, but remember interviews take time, right? You can only interview so many people. You get in-depth interviews. People tell you their opinions, why they have not moved, and the various things that have kept them in Makulu, why they've not gone to school, why they've not got a job, and so on and so forth. You get all this rich information, but you got it maybe from 20 people. And then you look at the data and you say, wow, this is rich data. This is really important. But I want to know how prevalent is this, are these reasons that they have, these 20 people have given. Is it the same for everyone? And some people say you interview until saturation, but sometimes you can't reach saturation, right? and you don't know, even if you were to reach saturation, you want to know, how prevalent is this? Or you might want to say, okay, these are the reasons we identified in Makululu. Now we want to see, how do they actually impact mobility? So you get quantitative data, either just for Makululu, or you include other compounds and put quantitative data. You've identified the variables from your interviews. So that's your qualitative part. It's helped you identify variables, the things that they say are important. And now you collect data on those variables. Now that you know why people, according to them, stay in that state, you take an instrument and you now go and get quantitative data on those variables. And then you run regressions typically, right? So what qualitative data does is that it goes deep, but it's not wide enough. Does that make sense, right? Quantitative data, typically the minimum is 30, but I mean, like, very few people run a regression with 30. It's just statistically, you can find significance with 30 observations. But normally we speak of 100, right? So you can imagine that in your interviews, you've looked at 20 people. You've identified key variables. You now take a wider view by bringing in the quantitative data and checking, are these variables which we identified actually important? You've run the regression. You're now expanding the breadth. You are saying, how prevalent are these problems? So that's starting with quals. You can start with quants, okay? That's typically how the economists that I've worked with do it. We start with a quantitative analysis. Maybe we have some data from the World Bank Enterprise, which looks at poverty and transition, and we take that data, we run a regression, and we find the variables or the factors that actually inhibit social mobility, right? But then we say, but why are these the variables that are important? We can't answer that question by looking at the quantitative data, right? We want to, why are they important? So what we do then, we find a sample, we go and we ask. You can have open interviews or you can have structured. Now, in this particular way, when you're doing it this way, remember you've identified things that are puzzling you from the quantitative data. So when you collect your qualitative data, you must structure it around those variables, right? Because you've already found those variables and now you just want to understand them better. You dig deep. So typically that's, you can do them concurrently, you can do them one after the other. Those are the variations you will get in terms of mixed methods. But the summary of it is that there are aspects of your study that need to be addressed by qualitative methods, aspects of your study that need to be addressed by quantitative methods, and then you work. But then there's an important thing that I really need to say. Don't do separate studies. It's very common where a student goes, picks a sample, does qualitative study, and then picks another sample and does quantitative study, and then says, my study was mixed. No, it wasn't mixed. You're not addressing the same population. So there must be a relationship between your populations in order for you to call it mixed methods. I hope I've answered your question. Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
Why are economists like you, and maybe it's an unfair question. Why are you guys afraid of qualitative research?
Yo, I can't speak on behalf of the economists, eh?
Because I appreciate the numbers, right?
Yeah.
But I also, I've never met a student who honors purely qualitative orientation.
Prof, I think you've used the right word. It's orientation. I mean, there are economists here. How do we teach in class? We teach quantitative methods. I said when I shared my story yesterday that for me, I've ventured into this because my first degree was in economics and my second, I did two majors. I majored in economics and sociology. And I really loved the sociology side of my degree, even if my main degree was economics. So I ventured, so the orientation, that's the first thing. Maybe that's part of what we we need to think about when we think about decolonizing, Prof. You know, to sort of change the orientation of how we present economics to our students. It always amuses me that the main sources of our economic information in developing countries is the World Bank and the IMF, for example. If you look at the World Bank reports, they're very qualitative in their nature. There's a lot of quants, there's a lot of numbers, but there's also quite a lot of files that takes place in those reports. So I'm not sure why we've continued to have this orientation. By the way, this is not an African problem at all. It's an economist's problem. Numbers are extremely important to the subject because most of what we do is checking prevalence. How prevalent is a problem? And a lot of economics is about policy making. You cannot make a policy based on an interview. A policy must be based on prevalence. So those are very important. So as much as we would love to walk into the qualitative space, we cannot walk out of the quantitative space because of what we do. As economists, because most of what we do is making recommendations about policies, making recommendations about changes that need to be made. In order to do that, we need to back it up and say quantitatively, this makes sense. So we can't step out of the quant space, but I think what we need to do is step into the mixed methods space because the stories are extremely important. Yes, Dr. Maronga. Okay, I have to finish. So. I don't have what, 15 minutes left? How many? 15? Actually, no, I don't have 15 minutes. How many minutes do I have less than that? Okay, thanks. Just wondering if they can hear you, Dr. Maronga. Sorry, I'll get back here. I just want to, for the sake of the people online, to catch what you said. Yeah, please go on.
I was saying my questions are emanating that was sent by certain external examiners about the number of words that a title should contain. Number two, when we talk of background in the proposal, should we also flesh out the international background, African background, national background, until I contextualize it to my own locality? Then number three, is it advisable for students when they are writing their statement problem or a problem of the statement to cite, to use literature?
Okay,
Thank you.
important question. Okay, so I'm going to be really quick in addressing those. Prof, I'll also defer to you because we sit on this committees together. So let's talk about the number of words. Number of words is important. In our institution, we've actually set the maximum number. Too high as far as I'm concerned. I think it's 22 or something like that. People say not more than 15. Can't have more than 15 words. It should not be a paragraph. It's a title. So you try to be as concise as possible. So that's the first one. And then in terms of the background, as far as I know, what you need to do is provide a background to your study. If I'm talking about Makulu, why am I talking about global context? Unless it's relevant, really. Unless that global context contributes to why there is chronic poverty in Makulu, there's no reason why I should have it. Unless I stand to be corrected, but definitely that's how I supervise and that's how I was trained, that you provide a context, the background is for a context. So if talking about what's happening at the global level has no relevance to my study, there's no reason why it should be there. What was your third question, Dr. Maronga? You have to cite. You have to cite. Because remember, one of the things you need to do in the problem statement of whatever you phrased it, now you muddled me up, is that you need to provide statistics. You need to identify the gap. You need to identify what's happening. And if I come and I say the government is not doing anything in Makuluru, well, I must be able to substantiate that. It's in fact, for us, if you bring a statement of the problem that has no references, don't even bring it. You will not pass the proposal. It's not going to happen. No, and it won't even pass at the department. It won't come to higher degrees. They know that it will fail. It's really important. And that's actually throughout your proposal. You need that certain, if you make a statement of facts, you need to reference it. Prof, do you have anything to add to that?
My opinion also is that I think different conventions of discipline. I've learned a lot from economics how they emphasize the numbers part, process of data modeling, the usage of data. That's probably clear. I think someone in the chat numbers of supported by qualitative experience, complexity. So a number can tell us that 500,000 youth are unemployed. But now we are now talking about the expanded definition of unemployment to include those that have given up looking for work. Initially, we started, I don't have, so that's why unemployed. But we are now looking at.
Okay, thank you, Prof. I think that was very important. Okay, I'm going to go really quickly. Don't worry about the 25. I've covered most of what's in there already. So really quickly, the next two slides, I just want to talk about dealing with proposal anxiety. How many of you have stressed about the fact that you need to do this research? Only one person, the rest of you are cool as cucumbers. I stress when I'm about to write a proposal, or when there's a call. So I just thought a few pointers to help you deal with writer's anxiety. One thing that's important is establish a writing schedule. Now, this is really important, especially for those of you that are students and academics at the same time, because you have a lot of teaching to do. And if you're from my institution, at the back of your mind, there's that fact that, oh my goodness, as a lecturer, I need to publish one article a year, otherwise I'm in trouble. So you can get very anxious about your own studies. So it's really important to establish a writing schedule, a routine. Some people, a few hours a day works for them. Some people say, I'll do 2 hours a day at the end of, my work day, I'll do 2 hours. Some people say 1 day a week. I need to concentrate. I can't, I guess maybe because of the administrative burden, but the only way I really ever get to write is when I take a whole week away from home. Because the first day I'm reorienting my brain and sitting down to write. So if you can manage, take a retreat, go out somewhere, sit and write for a week, then come back to work. Just think about your own situation and establish a writing schedule. Begin by free writing. I cannot overemphasize this, especially if you have a brain that's wired like mine. It's a problem. See, the problem I have in my brain is that if I'm going to know something, I need to know everything about that thing. It's a problem because so much has been written and now I don't have time to read the whole thing. And if I don't know it, I get anxious. I want to know more. But now by the time I finish knowing more, I don't even know what to write after that, right? So it's very important that when you start writing, begin by free writing. First start by saying, this is what I'm interested in, what I like. That really bug me. These are the things I'd really like to understand. Just, just this is what I would like. I think this paper would make this contribution, and just do some free writing by yourself. Once you've got that and you've got some focus, now go to Google Scholar or whatever search engine you're using, and limit yourself to the last 5 years. Just go Google Scholar, type in your search words, limit yourself to the last 5 years. If it's a seminar article, chances are it's been cited with it. Actually, if it hasn't been cited in the last 5 years, it's not a seminar article, right? So you will find the seminar articles will be cited by almost all the articles in that area. It's very important. Then you can go and read. When you're writing your proposal, we call it a brief literature review. So you can't do all the reading at the proposal stage. That again is subject to the way an institution works. So when I was working for Hare, for example, the students had 1.5 years to do their literature review, then they're examined. So it wasn't a proposal. You started by doing your literature. Your first examination was at the proposal stage. Okay. So you need to understand your institutional setup. But I think when I looked at your setup, it's very similar to ours. So that you get a brief literature review for your proposal. But the thing is that you must make sure that you read the seminar articles. Please don't read the abstracts of the seminar articles. Read the articles. The number of times you find students making reference to an article and what they are saying is not true is amazing. They read the abstract, misunderstand what is being said, and then they cite the article wrongly. So if it's a seminar article, please make sure you read it, you understand it. The seminar articles are those foundational articles in your discipline, which you should be able to say off the topic, or the top of your head, You should know them like the back of your hand. And Stiglitz and Way say this and this and this, and you're able to articulate it very well. Those are really important. Okay. So minimal reading initially, please, so that you can establish your own ideas. Keep a record of your thoughts. I don't know how many of you use OneNote by Microsoft, OneNote. It's been around for like ages, right? But I kind of discovered it last year, and it's a fantastic thing. It's fantastic. Please check out OneNote. You can keep your handwritten notes. You can scan them in. It will convert them into typed text. It will just take all your thoughts, put them in one place. You can speak into the thing. It will record it for you. It's amazing. When you have time, then you can sit. Because like for me, I'll be listening, for example, Prof. Willie will be talking, and he's talking business management. I have no idea what he's talking about. And then he says something, and I go, that would really be interesting to look at in informality. But now you write that piece of paper, and then you don't know where it's going. When Prof. Willie was talking, there's something you've lost the piece of paper, right? But if you have your OneNote, which I just discovered, very annoying because I have such beautiful thoughts from conferences I went to before. I can't find the pieces of it. So just write down, those thoughts. Like even if you are walking to your house or something comes in, you can speak it into your phone. Just quickly, an idea has come. When you go sit down, you develop that idea. And I know sometimes as academics, we look crazy. When we were young, we used to say, that one is a professor for sure. The way they sometimes behave like, that one's talking to themselves. They're writing. They've got good ideas. They want them recorded. So try to get all your thoughts down. Okay. Where was I? Sorry, I was escaping a meeting and now I have, there we go. Okay. Right, and as I mentioned the synopsis already, and a synopsis can really help you at the start when you're doing your free writing, I think. And I've written that last sentence. I said, don't stress yourself. This is a process that is iterative, right? So if you don't get it right the first time, once you talk to your supervisor, you go back, you work it. Because one of the things that I've seen that students stress, and I used to stress when I was a student, is fearing that I'm not doing the right thing. But I always say, thank God for the undo button, right? And the delete button, because you can always go back and start again, of course, with your eye on the clock, okay? So don't be too stressed as long as you're within time. In fact, it's a good thing when you get stuck. I say to my students, I'm not your examiner, I'm your supervisor. Which means when you get stuck, you contact me. And many times I like to be used as a sounding board. Actually, as a supervisor, it's good for me because when the students are using me as a sounding board, it also makes me think about my own research. When they're telling me what they're stuck with, and many times I sit and I listen, I ask questions, they talk. At the end, they actually know the answer themselves. Because sometimes what you need is just a sounding board. So don't get stuck by yourself. You know, talk to your supervisor, okay? Oh, stuck again. There we go. Then you can provide an overview of chapters. We're going to spend time on that. The timeline is also important. Most important thing is that please be aware of institutional timelines and milestones. Make sure that you always consult with your supervisor. That last one is really important. Please do not be overly ambitious. Students have a habit of picking something that they can't do. And I often ask my students, how many years do you have? 3 years. Okay, you really need to cut that into half because this project is for 6 years. You need to think, even with funding, sometimes you don't get funding because your project is so ambitious that it's not attainable. So you need to be very cautious that you're not being overly ambitious. Bibliography and appendices are very important. Do you guys use Mendeley here? Mendeley? You do? Okay, there's one person in the corner who uses Mendeley. It's a free software for referencing, fantastic. And in my view, it's even better than the paid versions. I used to use EndNote. I have a license for EndNote, but I've migrated from EndNote to Mendeley. It's brilliant. Your appendices, they can be diagrams, they can be tables, whatever, depending on your discipline. And just some really quick things, the length of your proposal. I think there was a template there. You need to pay attention, styles and tone, need to pay attention to the template itself. That's what this is really just about. And very quickly on the thesis, this is where the people that have already progressed, I think there was only 3 of you that have progressed. So once you've got your proposal, you've successfully defended your proposal, there's certain things that I want to just quickly highlight that you need to think about. The first one is you need to think about the resources that you have. In fact, I should say you should think about your resources at the proposal stage. If I want to do this study, do I have the funding to collect the data? It's very important. Don't pick up a topic that requires you to do field work and you have no money to go anywhere, right? Try and find data that you can afford. So find cost-effective methods for collecting data. They must be aligned to your objectives and research questions. And remember, your methodology section in your proposal is going to inform a lot of what you do in terms of actually carrying out your study. Another thing that I think is really important once you start, skills development, like what we're doing now. It's really important. You know, you are lucky because your programs have a taught component, which means you will go through a methodology training, right, as part of your component. Those, especially those that do research programs, don't go through that training. So they don't have those skills. So you have to invest in developing methodology skills. For those of you that have taught modules, you still need to take stock of yourself. Be honest with yourself. What skills do I lack? In order for you to have a successful research journey, you need certain skills. You need presentation skills. You need writing skills, various skills depending on your discipline area. In economics, for example, analytical skills are absolutely necessary. If you lack those skills, there's lots of resources. I always say to my students, you'll be amazed what you find on YouTube. And there's also, it's called MCOCI. I'll send it as part of the free resources, where you can get free courses to develop yourself. So please do a good, take stock of yourself, your skills, be honest with yourself, identify the skills development that you need, and then see how you can develop those skills. Ethics and protocols I've already talked about, very critical. Please do not collect data until you have cleared. Writing up your project, be very clear that you have the relevant software. There's a lot of free software online now, even quantitative software. I know the most popular ones are Stata, so we want to find money for Stata, SPSS, and so on. But R, for example, is a free software that does almost anything that Stata will do. And there are other various statistical software. I'm not aware of any free qualitative software. Prof, are you? All the ones I know are paid for.
Yeah, but also let's mention something about qualitative.
Yeah.
It does not analyze.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and then Grammarly, I think yesterday you did indicate that you are using Grammarly. The students have access to Grammarly? But okay, so that's a really important one. There is a free to reshare. Okay. Share screen. Okay. We are almost done. This, for me, is a summary that okay. Prof, am I audible? I'm audible. So I'm not going to go through this because it's a summary of everything that I've talked about this morning, afternoon. You can look at it yourself. It really it's just a map, a summary for you to think about, where do I start from when I'm looking at research? What's the next stage? But one thing you will see is that it is an iterative process. You go, you do it, and then you go over it again until you get it right. So that's very important. Okay. And then the last section I wanted to talk about is selecting your supervisor. And I'm playing with words here because you don't typically select your supervisor in our institution. There are institutions where you can say, you know, I'd like to come and do my PhD with such and such a person, and then you only go there if that person says they can take you on. With our institution, you allocate your supervisor. However, you are to supervisors that you've already selected. Okay, so I urge you, therefore, to go online, whatever is study at, but critical when you are selecting your supervisor, please check out that they are publishing in your area. Because the challenges we have with colleagues who don't publish is they make nonsense comments. The students come to the higher degrees committee. I mean, we've complained so many times. I mean, he knows what I'm talking about. We end up supervising their students at the committee because after 1 year of being supervised, the proposal comes to us and we're just like scratching our heads like, what's going on? You know, so make sure that if you're going to pick a supervisor, look them up before you contact them. Are they publishing in your area? Do they know anything? It's very important. Okay, and try, like I say, try advanced contact, and also the way they respond to you. You know, sometimes it's not just someone publishing in that area. Remember, we talked to those of you that were there yesterday. We talked about what you call it, clash of characters. So the way somebody responds to you, you know, when somebody writes to you, you say, oh, I'd like to be supervised by you. This is my, the way they respond, if the answer that comes back to you hits you in a particular way, you must just think, what if I do actually work with this person? Will this relationship work? That's very important. And I've already talked about the fact that they're allocated. So the last thing I want to talk about, I shared this yesterday with the supervisors, and I'm sharing it with you also. What do you see? The people who were there yesterday are not allowed. What do you see? People, guys, none of you are wearing glasses except one, so she's aided, she can see. The rest of you means you can see. What do you see? You can't see anything.
We see an elephant being asked to climb a tree.
Yes. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Okay. Anyone else? Yes? Sorry, I can't hear you. Yeah, please. Yes. It's a supervisor with different abilities. For me. And as a result, you become disgruntled because your supervisor is not like the other person's supervisor. But just because your supervisor is not like the other person's supervisor doesn't make them a bad supervisor. What's most important is what I have in the next slide, which is good practice and how you should relate to your supervisor. Communication, open communication with your supervisor is very important. And okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So for those online, in case you didn't get what was being said, the point being made was that students need to understand that their supervisors are human beings, I think would be what you said, right? They're human beings and their personalities will feed into the way they supervise. And also, if I can add to that, off the back of what we talked about yesterday, the way they were supervised is also going to influence the way they supervise you. So you need to really have an open discussion. And okay, if I say it's very, if the relationship doesn't work, there's a grievance process that the director mentioned. Follow that grievance, because at some point it may become necessary for you to say, maybe I should have another supervisor. Now, when we come back, I don't want to hear that there were 10 submissions for change of supervisor. That's not what I'm saying, right? So what I'm saying is that sometimes personalities clash. It doesn't make the supervisor a bad supervisor or the student a bad student. It just means your personalities don't match. That's all it is, right? So it's very important. We're human and we need to always remember that. One of the other things that is good practice between you and your supervisor, planning and timeline. If you agree on a timeline with your supervisor, please meet it. If you're not going to meet it, inform your supervisor in advance. I really dislike it when students don't submit work when they said they will, especially because we have so many other things to do. You set aside time to say, okay, my students are submitting on this day, I'm going to read. Then they don't submit on that day. They submit at their own time, and then 1 hour after you submitted, Prof, have you read my document? No, I'm sorry, the time is passed. Last week I was supposed to read it. Now it's gonna have to wait for 2 more weeks, right? So it's really important that you plan and you meet those timelines. You know, like I go back to the thing of we're human. Just come to me and say, you know what, I'm struggling with such and such. I don't think I'll be able to. And now just say, okay, you know what, the next time I'm important documents. You can develop your own, but something that helps supervisors to keep a record of their meetings with students. I think it's very important. Attending conferences, especially if you're a PhD student, please attend conferences. It's really important. You learn a lot, your presentations improve, you begin to see the gaps in your own work, you begin to see the areas your work should be going to. It's really important. Supervisors, let's identify relevant conferences for our students. I use the word relevant. There are so many conferences out there where people are just out to make money. Don't go to such conferences. Identify conferences that are relevant to your work. Try as much as possible to publish along the way. I shared yesterday that we've introduced the PhD by publication in our institution. And I think for most of my students that have just started, that's the route we've taken. We still, if you prefer a monograph, is still there as an option, but try to publish along the way. Look out for opportunities. Don't just wait on your supervisor to identify opportunities for you. Sign up for newsletters, for funding, for conferences, for student associations. Sign up for those things. It's part of you developing a community of practice, which is important. And whatever you do, please always consult with supervisors. I don't think we're going to have any questions from my answers because you've already done that. Thank you very much. Okay. Yes. Cross section. Brenda, yeah. Yeah. And just hold on for the sake of the people online.
Students who do not want to read and read and read and read until you cannot read, for you to identify a gap and for you to position yourself. Also, when writing a proposal, the tense should be different. And when it comes to citation, like what Prof talked about, we look at the currents. How current is that information? Is it the latest one? But the problem now, program director, Prof, is our students now, what they are doing, they just go to a study that was done, and then they copy, word for word, and quoting what happened in 2004 and 1998, not knowing that a lot is involved. And what we are looking for a generation of students who are creators of new knowledge. That is the whole purpose of doing research. So the bottom line is our students that we are faced with currently, not only in South Africa, not only in Zambia, is the students who do not want to read. Thank you very much. That's what I wanted to emphasize. Thank you.
No, I think she's captured me. I mentioned it in my. I think reading is extremely. The only thing that, and I already said it at the start, don't read too much because you will get lost. It really just becomes a forest. You focus on the current literature just to identify the gaps, and then on the seminar articles to give you a grounding. Once you've got you've found your feet, you are established now in what you want to do. Read. Yeah. Shall. Oh, okay. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone.
So before we ask our director Vice Chancellor, I'll call upon Ms. Lenga and Dr. Fury to come in front and present a few items that will help us facilitate the entire project process. So please feel free to come in front, Dr. Fury and Dr. Lenga, and help present the gifts to Prof. Prof. Simatele and
This is great. Prof. Simatele.
yes. And so, Prof. Simatele, since we respect seniority, yeah, please, you can step forward and give your gift. Yeah. Not Lonza. Not Lonza.
I have been born again. I'm now graduate. I have evidence to the fact. Thank you very much.
Like to stay.
Okay.
So I think maybe we put a chair here.
Just before you sit, Mr. James proposed something. Yes. forgot the check. All right, may I now call upon Prof. Willie to come and receive his NU pack.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Right. Hopefully it's to come back. Yeah, so you can, yes. Yes, yes. Yeah. For the evidence that you're given. Yeah.
Some people don't know gifts from Zambia. This is Mulungushi University honey. And my wife loves honey, so I'm sure in the cereal she'll be able to finish it up. It's organic, yes.
Badge.
On the
Yeah. Please go on.
inside.
My best.
Why not?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So lastly, I'll call upon Dr. Piri, who is our Director for Research and
Sorry,
Postgraduate
before we
Studies.
do that, we also have some last gifts to want. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Let's do that. We also would like to thank the committed team that has helped us in making this happen. It all started with a Zoom call. And some of us, even when I was doing the school run, I would be on the Zoom call. But there are people we also would like to thank and say thank you to them. So guided by Dr. Marongwe, I think let's start with, I called him Dr. Oh, okay, we'll do that. I'll break protocol, sorry.
Please,
I said, I called him Dr. James all the time in my emails. Yes, Dr. James, Dr. James. And I'm told that he's in the process of working towards his doctorate. Through guidance, yes. Absolutely. I'm repeating the obvious so that everyone can hold him as an accountability to say, yeah, that day you were proclaimed as doctor. So, Dr. Marongwe, would you like to give?
Thank you for a warm welcome. Thank you so much.
And one of the things that's there, Dr. James.
No, he's Dr. James.
I would like you to also wear a branded tie. And then the other person who would like to thank Prof. Simatele can help us with that one.
There you go. So thank you so much for accepting this invitation to partner. Colleagues, it's been amazing. Your reception has been amazing, and your willingness to work with us has been amazing. We're really grateful for this, and we look forward to working with everybody, the students and my students and all the colleagues and everybody.
Okay.
My students.
Other people would like to thank. There were people who were in that initial call that we had, staff members who, yes, please come up. That team that we had. This is for the charity. Yeah. And then
See, because you've already got it up.
yes.
Don't write for it for
You in that call as well. Sure. Thank you very much.
So you already got it for it.
Okay. And maybe the other colleagues. Yeah, we'll just.
Yeah, you get, yeah. Sit down.
Maybe with the students as well.
That, yeah, we're going to do a good photo. We can do a photo with the students.
You look lovely.
So we revived them with them. That tells that you're young.
All right. Maybe a group photo with the
Photo with the
students
students outside.
outside. After yes.
Okay, so thank you so much. All the speeches have been done. It's right here, I gave everything. So I don't know what I'm supposed to say. Whether I should add or some plan. So all I can say is thank you very much, especially for the students who have managed to log in today, and for the members of staff, as she has mentioned. So on behalf of the university, this has been a very wonderful and very constructive workshop, which has really built our capacity. So close this workshop from this moment, and we are invited for lunch. Thank you so much.
Before you leave, can I just give you your opinions?
We're out of it now. That's the
Oh, yeah. Oh, we're still connected. Yeah, absolutely.